All right, so welcome once again, everyone, to Indelible Evenings. And our special guest for the evening is Jacob Nordby. Now, I'm saying evening, but I know for many of you this is morning or afternoon or noon. Um, but in London timing, it's good morning to everyone. Jacob Nordby is a co-founder of a writing room collective, Heal Plus Create, the Institute for Creative Living Foundation, 501(c)(3). Is that how you say it, Jacob?
Yes.
And the author of several books, including Blessed Are the Weird, a manifesto for creatives and the creative cure. He previously worked as a marketing director for a traditional publishing house and oversaw the launch of many best-selling books. A working author and creative guide, he has a passion for helping writers solve their challenges and enjoy the satisfaction of sharing their work with the world. You can meet him at www.jacobnordby.com. And there's bonus multimedia journaling program gift on www.creativeselfjournal.com. And for the Creative Cure book page, it is www.creativecurebook.com. So, Jacob, we would like to welcome you once again. And without further ado, we're going to hand it over to you. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Rula and Sarah. So good to meet you both. And I'm so really grateful to be here today. Today for me, this evening for you. And I see a few faces I am so glad are here. Sarah Baxter and Susan Wolf and Joey is here, and probably some others I can't see right now, but I'm so pleased to see you here. You've heard me before, so the fact that you're coming back it's a compliment. I am so glad to see all of you, and I want to set this up as not so much a talk as an interaction today, because I feel like we need to connect with each other and we need to move this beyond, at least what I'm talking about today. I want to move this beyond a mental concept or an academic idea. I want us to embody, I want us to bring it into our lives more deeply. So, with that in mind, I'll be asking you some questions and asking you to use the chat feature. Just enter that in. I will keep up with that and respond to as many as I can when I ask a question. But this helps us actually, again, bring it out of just our heads and more into our experience. Because my goal, if I have a goal today, would be to send you home with some things you can actually try out, actually experience or expand. And by the way, I'm aware so many of you are academics, creatives, so I'm aware that I'm in a room full of peers right now, and I love that. So for me, this is such an important time on earth for us to connect with each other, to connect with our own inner creativity, our own inner aliveness, and then take that back out into the world in some way. It's crucial. It's no longer the option of merely the creative class. So I want to ask a question to start out with, if you use the chat feature. On a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being not concerned at all, 10 being, oh my God, I'm having a hard time sitting still, I'm so anxious about it. Where would you place yourself on a scale of anxiety about what's happening in the world at this point? I live in America, and so I'm sure a lot of you will start laughing. It's like pretty obvious. A lot going on over here. Okay, I'm seeing a lot of eights and nines, fives, eights, 10. If you I go higher if you offered, yeah. Okay, well, I love that we're starting out with such a interactive group. Thank you for responding. That really helps me. I've done presentations where I couldn't see anyone and I couldn't interact with anyone, and that really raises my anxiety. So the fact that we're able to talk to each other a little bit right now is really useful. Okay, so it's pretty clear to me that all of us are experiencing a fairly high level of anxiety. Anxiety often leads to overwhelm, and that can often make us feel like our contributions, our place in this world isn't enough, that we aren't capable of making significant change, right? Or maybe even capable of keeping a place in this world. If you're feeling like that, this talk will not take care of all of that anxiety, but I do want to send you back to your lives, to your worlds, with a little more of that sense of I do have access to intelligence and power and curiosity and the ability to move forward. All of those to me are under the umbrella of that word creativity. So I was chatting with Rula and Sarah just before we began, and they told me that of their love for the Jungian work, and I love that too. I read I read Jung's book Man's Search for Meaning a few years ago, and then I reread it right away, and it's probably time to read it again. But in that book, he talks about our deep hunger for meaningful ritual and how that our modern world has eliminated a lot of ritual. So a lot of us move through our lives mechanically or by rote, and we find ourselves cut off from some of the important connections to each other, to ourselves, to existence itself. And so I'm going to share with you some of the folks who know me have seen me do this. I'm going to share with you a very simple ritual, and this is meant to help me shift into a space where I can be fully present. So it actually shifts my awareness. So I'm going to light a candle. If you have a candle nearby and want to join me in that, I would love to see you do that. I see a few candles coming up. Um, I didn't send out a list of needed materials such as matches and a candle. But as we light this candle, if you can just, or if you're just observing me do it, I would just love it if you could use this as a signal to come here, to come inward, to allow yourself to be fully present as we spend time together right now. It's a simple thing, and lighting a candle could be as prosaic as simply needing a little bit of light, which is a perfectly fine use for a candle. So many things in our lives can be looked at in that way. It's either a mechanical process to get a desired outcome, or if we use our attention and our intention and we bring our focus to something, it can actually help us access deeper places in our minds, in our hearts, in our souls, deeper intelligence and creativity. So I see a candle coming in the chat. Thank you. Thank you for joining me in this. And I would also love it, since we're all experiencing a fair amount of anxiety, I would love it if you would just take a moment and stretch your arms out behind you if you can, and move your fingers and take a long, deep breath with me and let it out. Let's do that one or two more times. Let's just feel ourselves in our bodies and let it out. And one more time. Notice how you are supported wherever you're sitting or resting in whatever position you're in. Just notice as you come fully present into this moment, not what happened before or what will happen later or the great out there, everything that's out there. Just notice how right now in this moment you're here and you have what you need to be here. And I just want to thank you for spending this time with me. As we come into this space, I want to read you something from a little book called Belonging by Tokopah Turner. Those of you who are Jungians are probably familiar with that name. I've read this a few times as I give talks, not always, but today it felt especially important. She says, I believe that we have more than enough creativity to solve the problems of our times, but we have to make a perilous trek into the wilderness within to reclaim it. There is a stand of undeveloped jungle, a place of indigeneity within each of us that can never be domesticated. It is a borderless land, beyond personality and convention, even beyond thought, where pure creativity arises. Like the signature song of a tropical bird, the spiraling of an arbutus tree, the evening scent of a jasmine bush, there is an essence in each of us intended to be expressed. Few make the trek into this creative wild because the path requires great vulnerability. To come into our true originality, we must surrender the layers of numbness we use to protect our hearts. How many of you would say that you've had to, as a coping mechanism, had to begin to surround your heart with some version of numbness, some kind of coping? Use chat if you would. How many of you feel like, oh my God, I have had to do some things just so I could survive, so I could operate, so I could be here? Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of yeses. Numb is the new black. I love you people. So much armoring all the time, yes. And there's a lot of reasons for this. Um, Obviously, those of us who are here, if you're here, you are likely, well, let me just ask the question rather than assuming. How many of you would say that you identify as creative in some way? Like you know that you're creative. I see a lot of heads nodding on screens right now. A lot of yeses coming in. Okay, perfect. Well, that is perfect. Okay, no, but my heart and empathy are on overload, learning healthier ways to protect, not shut down or clench up. Yes. Um, and I just want to say here, when I ask a question, it's not with a desired answer in mind. However you show up, whatever is true for you, that's important to me. And so I don't ask you to come up with a very specific answer here. And I see that our time is already moving along quickly, so I best be moving. I'm going to share my screen with you. Well, before I do that, I just want to say a lot of people in this world. In fact, my third book, The Creative Cure, was really written because I began to hear so many people say, I'm not that creative. I'm not that creative. To me, that hurts my heart as a human because it is the onset of the industrial era during which we began to commodify everything. We began to make everything, we required conformity so that machines would work. And that affected everything from our semantics, our linguistics, to our daily schedules, our sense of timeliness, all of that sort of thing. So we began to take on the attributes of the machines we were creating that were supposed to set us free. And so what I've discovered is so many people have cut themselves off from believing themselves or seeing themselves as creatives or even understanding what that word means. And now I'll share my screen because we're going to dive right into that. I will send a PDF over to Rula and Sarah in case you want to share these slides later. When I was working on, well, the second book, the Blessed Are the Weird, and later The Creative Cure, because I wrote that book realizing I wanted to invite more and more people into understanding they are truly creative. About that time in 2015, between 2015 and 2020, I saw this report where the World Economic Forum every 5 years does a study and comes up with these are the top skills needed to survive and thrive in our careers. So in 2020, their outlook was that creativity had moved from the bottom of the list, number 10, to number 3. Some other softer things were coming in, such as emotional intelligence, cognitive flexibility. More and more of these things were coming in. Well, since then, it's even become more crucial. So I just looked it up. In January 2025, the World Economic Forum says creative thinking and resilience, flexibility and agility are also rising in importance, along with curiosity and lifelong learning. Well, that led me to wonder then if creativity is so important, and even the big data people are beginning to see its crucial nature, why is it that almost nobody says, by percentage, why is it that almost nobody says I'm creative? And so I sent out a survey. I did a study with about 10,000 people. And so I asked a question, what is your greatest creative struggle? And the responses began to just pour in. I couldn't believe the amount of response. And I also had an optional box on this one question survey. Tell me how you feel about that. And again, I was overwhelmed by the emotion. People were clearly longing to express their true selves, their creative selves. And they were pouring out their hearts and telling me long stories in this question box that I did not even expect. One of the top responses to the question, what's your greatest creative challenge, was, I doubt my talents and ability. I don't think I'm good enough. I doubt my talents and ability. I don't think I'm good enough. Many others, I start projects but then abandon them. I'm not sure why. I give all my energy to something else. I see myself as a creative person, but I don't think my creativity is valued by others. I'm going to just stop sharing the screen for a moment. As you read that list, as you even think of that question, what would you say your greatest creative struggle might be when it comes to stepping into who you really are, sharing yourself with the world in some way? I'll just pause a moment while you answer in chat. This is a crucial question. And as you're thinking about that and putting responses in, what I discovered over time was that creativity was this idea. And it's a big word, kind of like love or God or some of these big words, and so much definition has been added to them over the years as we try to define it in some way. But in many ways, people were using creativity or they're parking creativity in this little tiny corner over here. And they're like, I can be creative when I go and paint or when I go and dance. Um, but most of my life is supposed to be spent in this sort of gray, monotonous zone of doing things over and over again a certain way for survival in most cases, or for fitting in other cases. And so I began to realize that this was a much deeper problem. I'm just reading through your comments here. Thank you. Not good enough. Time constraints. Not good enough runs deep. The patriarchy. Artist ends up in the garret. Oh my God, Dr. Marion. Yes. Capitalism. I don't allow myself to have creative conflict. I love going into rabbit holes. I'm a fellow rabbit hole explorer, so thanks for saying that. So, what I feel like is really important here is just to understand that what I believe about my creativity is what I believe about myself. And if you want to put that in your own terms, what I believe about my creativity is what I believe about myself. Because your creativity is your essential self, your life force. I see it as crucial as the sap in a tree or blood in your veins. It needs to flow through every part of your life. It needs to. The parts of your life where your creativity is not flowing are the parts that will begin to atrophy and die at some point. And so this led me to begin asking, okay, so what militates against us expressing ourselves, of believing in this place in us that has so much value? And I began to spot these three main enemies of creativity: socialization, which is the process of how we become what we know as a human rather than just a feral, right? So we grow into adulthood by mirroring others, by mimicking them, right? And that is a perfectly valid and necessary process. That's how we learn to eat and go to the bathroom and read and do all the things we do. So socialization is a tricky one because we need it, but then along the way, we get the message, we internalize the message that I'm not good enough. Who I am, I need to turn that down. I need to not stand out, you know? Rejection is a huge one, and that it goes hand in hand with socialization. The fear of rejection is so primal in us. It takes us back to our cave dwelling days, hunter-gatherer days, when we had to be part of a band to survive. Most people wouldn't survive outside of a community or a tribe, right? And so that sense of, if I get rejected, I'll get kicked out, which those of you who read Brene Brown, she talks about shame as being that. It's like the fear of being put out, of being shunned, outside the tribe. So that in itself is a traumatic experience, and that brings us to traumatic experiences. In this day, I'm so grateful that psychology and therapy and all of this is just bringing this so forward right now. So more and more people are able to talk about and own up to, be aware of the traumatic experiences that shaped them. But many, many people are still keeping themselves back from that because they say, I didn't have any capital T trauma. I just went through what we all did. But what we discover is even the things that wouldn't hit the adverse childhood experiences assessment um, often affect us even more. The low-key bullying, the being overly criticized at home, the messages that we receive over and over again that says, stop trying to stand out, right? So now we're having a look at the problem. There's so much debate about left brain, right brain, but for the purposes of today, I just want to spend some time here and just say that we are in a world, and again, I mentioned the industrial era earlier. We're in a world that prizes and rewards left brain activities, goal orientation, planning, logic, control, right? Analytical, sequential, all these things. And by the way, I don't want you to take away anything from what I'm saying today that suggests that we shouldn't have our left brain. We absolutely need it to execute on the things that we imagine that we want to bring into life. But let's look over here at the right brain. emotional intelligence, social intelligence, holistic thinking versus binary thinking versus the thinking that says there's a sucker's choice. It's either left or right. It's either capitalist or communist, whatever binary you want to come up with. Your right brain has the ability to synthesize. My friend Susan Wolf, who's here today, we were having a conversation the other day, and she said, I love the word contextualize. So the right brain has the ability to help us find our context, help us find our bearings inside of that. Also, compassion, imagination. I'm going to stop sharing just for a moment here because imagination to me is such a crucial aspect of bringing ourselves forward in this world. It's a, and in fact, if you think about it, there's a creative formula I discuss in the Creative Cure, but the creative formula says that everything we create begins with imagination. Starts with imagination. Look around you. In fact, look right into the screen we're using right now. That began in imagination. What comes next are feelings. So we have to feel the things we're imagining. And people who they believe themselves to be entirely logical, it's actually interesting studies have shown they operate on emotion and feelings even more than people who would say I'm more emotional. So the fact is we all need emotion as part of what we're creating. So there's emotion, there's feeling. Then there's the words or the stories we tell about what we've imagined. Now um, we are conditioned to begin using this imagination thing early in life to create what we don't want. Okay, so we begin to be taught early in life to look around the corners and look for the risks, for the downside, for the disappointment, for the rejection, for the pain, right? And we create those scenes with crazy clarity. And I'm not suggesting that that's what we're always bringing into our lives, but that is one use of the imagination, and we are barely using it for what it's really meant, which is to create what we would love, right? How many of you, I'm going to look in chat here, how many of you early on got messages such as, that's just your imagination, stop daydreaming, grow up, you're wool gathering, saying a lot, sure. Yeah, yes, absolutely, all the time. Well, this is part of the enculturation, this is part of the socialization that taught us to not trust that part of ourselves, that part of our psyches, right? Oh, yes, when I was a kid in 1950, says Paul. Yeah, first primary teacher complained to my mom that I daydreamed too much. Okay, perfect. So what's interesting is that along with so many other of these right brain characteristics, such as intuition, such as empathy, such as compassion, creativity, but also over there's risk taking and reasoning, right? So in your right brain, in that part of our psyche, however we want to express that, exists this self that can't quite be fit into a box. There exists a self who's willing to take risks, who's willing to see things that others can't. There's this pattern recognition. Here's this idea over here, and here's the other one, and here's how they come together. Let me just say that almost everything you see over here in the list of the right brain requires courage to reclaim it, to have access to it, right? It takes courage to speak up with a perception that you have that might go counter to those around you. It takes courage to express compassion, especially right now in our world. It takes courage to find the synthesis between seemingly opposing sides. We have lost, in so many ways, we've lost our capacity for paradox. And for me, that is what part of what we're talking about right here in this session is to go back out into the world saying, I am gifted, I have been given the capacity to find the common ground between seemingly complete opposites. I am given, I have the capacity to operate differently rather than just follow one track or the other that creates more war and more resistance and less of the solutions that we really need. I was talking to my dear friend Chris Niebauer, who's a neuropsychologist, one day when I was writing The Creative Cure, and we were talking about these things. And I said, well, Chris, it sounds like what you're saying is that in our cultures, it's almost like we've told a bodybuilder to only work the left side of their body. And they took that instruction and did that for the next 30 years and then discovered, I can barely walk. I have no functional balance. I'm really not very useful in this world, even though I have all of this muscle over here. And he said, "Oh my God, exactly." He's like, because of how we were trying to develop out of scarcity and fear, we created so many systems around ourselves and began to so prize the left brain activities that we began to lose the function. So what I'm inviting you into here today is really more of saying, wow, I already know that I'm creative. So many of you self-identified that way. I know I'm creative, but I want you to begin to understand how crucial you are. You may not go out there and create the next great invention that changes everything, all of those things. What you need to know, though, is that your capacity to be alive and to lower your anxiety about being in existence right now and to begin to show up with even more empathy, compassion, the ability to communicate these bridges that need to be built between what seem to be so opposite, seem to be so at war with each other. We actually need you. And so for me, it becomes so crucial to begin to just exercise more and more of that connection to those right brain characteristics and begin to value them, even if you get messages that our society doesn't value them. It might not put money in your bank account, but what you do begin to develop is more and more resilience, more and more ability to turn your light up rather than down. You find the courage to stand out when it's time to stand out, right? I'm going to stop sharing for a moment because I want to see your notes. So I want to leave time open for discussion. I know that I'm about already through the talk portion of mine. But before I go, before we go into that part, I also wanted to share with you something that is already existing in you. I'm sure a lot of you have seen the polyvagal scale here. I feel like it's such a crucial thing for us to remind ourselves. I have virtually tattooed this inside of my eyelids so that I can refer to it all day long, so I can remember when I'm moving up through the arousal scale of fight or flight or fawn or into freeze. Um, I can remember that there's a way to re-access the resource that I have inside, and you have it also. All of us has this. It exists in our nervous system. The trouble with living in a world full of change and uncertainty is that even existence itself, even if your job is secure, even if everything else in your life is really pretty good, the fact of living in our modern society is stressful. It arouses anxiety because uncertainty, uncertainty by itself creates anxiety in our bodies, right? Change brings uncertainty. Would anybody here would anybody here want to argue with me that we've experienced over the last few decades what would be an unsustainable rate of change? So what our great grandparents might have experienced in an entire lifetime, the amount of change they experienced, we've experienced more than that. We've experienced several lifetimes worth of change in just a few decades, and it doesn't appear to be slowing down. Because of that, most of us are walking around half crazy all the time. What I want to invite you to do right now is where we started with this, where we lit a candle, we breathed. I also want to invite you to do more of what you're doing with Rula and Sarah here, gathering with others who are seeing it this way, who know that we need these solutions, who know that we need to have self-expression. These are the kinds of things that actually help us lower our anxiety. So I want to just ask you right now to take a deep breath, and as you let it out, let your shoulders drop, let your neck move a bit. Let yourself sit down in your sit bones a little more comfortably. And let's do that one more time. I want you to imagine you can relax your earlobes and your eyebrows and your hip bones. All right. Just a few breaths at a time can actually help us come down a little bit on the scale of fight or flight or freeze or fawn. Right. It can bring us down into this creative green zone. And look here. This is the holy grail of spirituality, of therapy, of yoga, of so many different things, practices we do to help us. This is the holy grail right here in our ventral vagal state. It is reflected with joy. We become in the present. We become grounded. We have social engagement. We feel connection to others. We have curiosity and openness, compassion. It's what allows us to be mindful. Without being in this state, we often find ourselves up on the arousal scale of fight or flight. We think that we must fight or we must flee or we must bow down and fawn, right? Or sometimes we get so far up there that we actually freeze. We begin to shut down. We feel shame, hopelessness, depression. We believe that we have no value, right? What I want to ask you to do and suggest to you is find practices that can help you come down into this green zone. You can use yoga. You can take a 20-minute walk, especially if you make that a ritual like we talked about before. You turn that into a ritual of mindfulness, of attention and intention. This is why I'm taking this walk, is to remind myself of my vital aliveness, to remind myself of why I'm here, to remind myself that I'm enough, right? So if you can daily practice this, you actually begin to find that place in you that has courage to stand back up, that has courage to take the next step. And I feel like there's one more here. Oh, yes, there is. Dr. Howard Thurman. He says, don't ask what the world needs. Ask what makes you come alive and go do it. Because what the world needs is people who have come alive. So many of us creatives, so many of us who feel the call to share ourselves, to bring forth what lies within, also feel like it's not going to be enough. How many of you would agree with that statement? It's like, yes, I have beautiful things in me, but it won't be enough. It won't change the world. It won't fix this. It won't fix this, right? Um, I want to invite you into thinking about what Howard Thurman said. Go find out what makes you come alive. Find out what makes you come alive and do it. Because what the world needs, don't worry about changing the world out there. Bring your focus inward. Bring your focus to what can be done within your own arm's reach. If you stretch your arms out right now, it makes a circumference. Within your own arm's reach exist relationships. There exists within your own arm's reach small areas for improvement in your home. You can make your world more tolerable. And Anais Nin talks about that. I made a world more tolerable for myself, and that makes a world more tolerable for others. It actually matters. Your aliveness inside of your own arm's reach matters. I remember when I first came to this, I was feeling so overwhelmed. My life had been turned upside down. It was around the 2008 mark when the financial crisis had turned many things upside down, including my business and my life and who I thought I was and everything. And I felt so helpless to do anything worth doing in this world. And that's when I got the message, you need to take care of what's within your own arm's reach. You can't defeat the banks, you can't defeat the governments, you can't defeat all the dark forces. But what you can do is you can become more alive right here. Oh, and by the way, I want you to put your hands over your heart right now, if you would. You are within your own arm's reach. We need you to take care of you first. We need you to allow yourself to come alive again right now first. As you do that, you begin to have more resource to share with others. I don't really read from my book very often. I thought I might have a little more time to read from the introduction from along with some of those slides, but I won't do that. But I want to read to you the poem that became the book and became a whole group of people I never knew I would meet. I never knew that I would find my place of belonging with so many others. Um, my friends who know me, who are here today, know that I cry easily. Um, I feel touched to be in the presence of people who have the courage to keep standing up, to keep moving ahead. So as you listen to the words of this poem, I wrote this because I was feeling so outside of the world. I didn't know where my place was. I didn't know how to regain my place or my footing. And so when I literally was driving down the road and the words began to come to me and I pulled over and I found an old bill envelope underneath my seat and began to write it out on the back of this bill. And then I put it on an image and shared it on social media. And I'd shared many things before, and this one just took off. And it took off in ways I would have never expected. It kept going and going. It kept being shared. People made their own versions of it. I've heard that it's painted on a wall somewhere in Singapore. That isn't as important to me, though, as the fact that it struck a chord in people because it helps us remind each other and ourselves that we actually do belong here. Blessed are the weird people, poets, misfits, writers, mystics, heretics, painters, and troubadours, for they teach us. to see the world through different eyes. Blessed are those who embrace the intensity of life's pain and pleasure, for they shall be rewarded with uncommon ecstasy. Blessed are ye who see beauty in ugliness, for you shall transform our vision of how the world might be. Blessed are the bold and whimsical, for their imagination shatters ancient boundaries of fear for us all. Blessed are ye who are mocked for unbridled expression of love in all its form, because your kind of crazy is exactly that freedom for which the world is unconsciously begging. Blessed are those who have endured breaking by life, for they are the resplendent cracks through which the light shines. I'll repeat that last line more directly. Blessed are you who have endured breaking by life, for you are the resplendent cracks through which the light shines. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jacob. That was incredible.
Thank you.
So it was an
I'll collect
amazing
myself.
talk, and we're still not done. So I guess we can open it up for questions right now. If anyone would like to say something or comment, I can see everyone's using the chat box. That's wonderful. And also feel free to raise your hand so that Sarah or I can call on you.
While you're while you're thinking of raising your hand, I know that takes a certain amount of courage. Um, I would love to hear your voice if you're willing to, but I would love for you to maybe use this as a journaling prompt later today or this evening. That draw a circle on the page and imagine that that's what's within your arm's reach, and allow your imagination, allow your psyche to find some places within your own arm's reach that need to have that life-giving, your own self, your artfulness, your love, your empathy, your creativity and imagination, something that needs to be restored or healed or improved in some way. Is it a relationship? Maybe drop a card in the mail, have tea with someone. What is it within your own arm's reach? Is it yourself? Do you need to take a walk and come down into that beautiful green zone in yourself and tap into that deep aquifer of resilience that you have? What is it? I would love for you to take that home with you, because what I know is that when you do, if you're a cell in the collective body, as you become healthy, you spread health to the cells around you without even trying, simply by being healthy. You don't have to start a campaign to change the world. You don't have to start a beautiful organization such as this one that Rula and Sarah have done. Even by simply being in your health, you begin to spread more health around you. Oh, and by the way, we now know that healthy cells contain much more power, much more energy, much more effectiveness than diseased cells. So by becoming healthy, by coming into your true health and your true voice and yourself, you actually have much more power than if you allow yourself to be in a state of dis-ease, right? I love your comments that are coming in. Do anyone have questions, or does anyone want to put in chat or raise your hand and say, what has your psyche selected as a place to begin within your own arm's reach? What needs to be healed or in some way restored?
Thank you so much for this, Jacob. It's just been beautiful. Um, and if anybody wants to type something in the chat, we're also happy to read it out. But we do see we have 2 hands raised prior to your most recent prompt. So I don't know if that's what they want to respond to, or if you're okay with taking questions as they come.
I'm totally happy with that.
Okay, so we have Andriana.
Hi, thank you so much.
Hello.
I'm so moved. I just want to thank you, Jacob. my grandfather's name was Jacob and my mother's name was Jacqueline. She passed away, and I just have
Mm,
felt her presence very strongly the past couple of days. I really needed
mm,
this. I was in a meeting. I'm a poet and an author, and I was in a meeting yesterday with a lot of social activists, all extremely high-powered, really doing all they can on the front lines in this country to support immigrants and migrants and people with disabilities and the LGBTQ plus community. And I was struggling in the meeting. I do a lot of healing circles. I do a lot of work with women and youth, but I could feel myself having to convince myself that I had as much right to be there as anyone else, and I was
yeah.
doing the work. So your message today truly enveloped me. I want to first thank you for that and the practice. I really heard my mom's words as you were speaking just now about true health. And I wanted to ask you, on those days where you wake up and find it hard to really convince yourself, do you have any practices or ways of dropping down, into your body, into your truth? You've just shared a couple, but any others would be really valuable. Thank you.
Mm, thank you, Andriana. You mean mornings when I wake up and have a hard time convincing myself, like this morning?
Yes.
Yes. Um, no, and I'm so glad you asked. Rula earlier read when she was introducing me the link to the creativeselfjournal.com, and that points you to a page that has a free download of this program. I have a 3-minute video where I talk about why. There's an ebook, audiobook version, very short, I think 13, 14 pages. And then I actually have a visualization, a guided visualization that helps us kind of settle down into that green zone. But the journal practice, Andriana, is, to me, this is so crucial. I began really journaling in earnest after that period in my life I talked about earlier, when my life turned upside down. My father gave me a copy of The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron, and he said, "I think you need this. Someday I'll need to get this back." And when I moved to Austin, Texas with it, one day I was going to this part-time job that I'd found just to pay the bills, and I took that along with me because I was in this warehouse, and I began reading and began practicing morning pages and began doing the other practices. That really actually helped me find my footing again and actually helped me begin writing, which had been a lifelong dream and I'd never paid attention to it before that. Over time, though, I began to realize that my morning pages practice needed to help me ground a bit. And so I developed a process that asked 3 very simple questions. And when I built this, the Creative Self-Journaling program, I didn't think it was worth very much. It felt so simple. And when I put it out there and people began responding, and I had therapists call me and say, my clients have never been willing to journal. Now they're doing it because it's so simple. So I'm glad it works. So there are 3 questions. The first question is, how do I feel right now? We are given the message early in life that our feelings don't matter. Many of us internalized that. And so even asking ourselves that question on paper, how do I feel right now? And being very honest about it. This isn't how you need to show up in front to the world and put a mask on of being okay. This is like, how do I really feel? So when I pour my heart out in a few minutes or sometimes longer on the question of how do I feel, I often go right below the surface and discover, oh, this is what's really causing me trouble, right? Or this is what I need. And that brings us to the second question. What do I need right now? And again, many of us were taught early in life that our needs don't matter, right? And so we began to live our lives as if our needs don't matter. So asking this question brings us back in connection with that inner part that says, oh, this is what I need. Sometimes it's very prosaic. I need a glass of water. I need a nap. I need to pee. Sometimes I need a sense of I can get through this day. Whatever it is, when you write these things down, what happens is you come into greater connection with yourself. And you send that signal to your inner self that I matter. My needs matter. The third question is, what would I love to create? Now, often when I'm going through emotionally difficult times, I will switch that up and say, how would I love to feel right now? So, how would I love to feel? I'd love to feel more confident. I would love to feel less anxious. I would love to feel like I'm enough for this day. Whatever it is, again, what we're doing is we're activating our imagination. Now, sometimes when things are a little less turbulent, we might want to use that question for a longer range vision of this is what I would love to create. We begin to activate our imagination toward, oh, this is what I can create today. And I would invite you as you go home and perhaps work on that question of what's within your arm's reach. Use that third question. What would I love to create? I would love to create greater health in this relationship. I'd love to create greater artfulness in the way I go about my work. Whatever it might be, you're going to find that you begin to engage your creative nature as you ask those questions. I went on for a fairly long time there, Andrianos. Thank you for asking the question.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah, bless you. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
And we have the next question from Sarah.
Oh, good. I know Sarah.
Hi, I couldn't not say anything. It's lovely to see you, Jacob.
I'm so glad to see you. Are you where in the world are you right now?
I'm at home, just south of London. I haven't been travelling anywhere since August, so I've been a bit stir crazy really. From what you said earlier, one of the things being rejection, I've never felt rejected, and I think maybe even if people have rejected me, I've not noticed and carried on anyway. But a big thing for me these last few years is lack of community. So post COVID, everyone working from home, and I've been going for job interviews, and so many of them are working from home, and it just fills me with horror because it's just so cut off, and you're not actually with people. But from this, what I have realised and what I knew would happen is that I really miss the writing room, for many, many reasons. And one of the reasons is that sense of community, and everyone knows each other and everyone gets each other. So it's kind of like a meeting of hearts and minds, really. So you can go and join any group, but you won't necessarily feel part of it. So it's a bit of a cheeky question, really, but I've just wondered what a writing room is doing at the moment, kind of like what you've got going on. And do you still have all those silent writing hours with people? Because I miss them, and my creative work misses them as well.
Yes. What a lovely program. Well, I've actually exited leadership at a writing room to focus more on holistic work like this. But I love their program, and I love what you said about community. And this is something I want to bring up for all of us because it's not just for writers. I'm a regular at a coffee shop here in Boise, Idaho called The Alchemist. They have two locations. My twin children each work at one of them. And one of the baristas a month ago came to me because I write their monthly newspaper that they put out in their shops, and she said, I want to highlight the creativity of our baristas and some of our regulars. There's a couple of writers who frequent these shops, and so we put together a creative collection pop-up last week. Actually, is the first one we did. It was very simple. It was in the coffee shop after hours. The owners were on board, and so they opened the doors and they sold some beer and wine and coffee. Um, but what it was the people getting together in very simple ways, and they laid out the jewelry and the crocheting and the art. And this person over here has a micro bakery where she makes sourdough bread, and I brought a few of my books. And what happened was the community, the folks who love that shop came in, and there was this warm glow that happened. There was this warm glow that happened in that shop. And it wasn't for the purpose of making money. It wasn't for anything. We weren't worried about numbers. But what happened, Sarah, and all of us, is that we found a connection, an analog, not on screens, even though I love the ability to connect this way. But there's something so crucial that happens when we leave our homes or we bring people into our homes and we gather and we share the things we've made, the things that matter to us. And I want to put the challenge out there to you. I'm sure many of you have coffee shops or tea houses or pubs or something, libraries, places where they would be willing to open it up and make the invitation. Hey, let's gather, let's show each other what we have. And really, the creative products themselves are kind of a sideline, a sideshow. It's really not about that as much as it is we get to show up and exchange the energy of community and connectedness, right? So, Sarah, I just love that you brought that in because I feel like that's something we need now more than maybe ever before on this planet. Because Technology has connected us, but it's actually isolated us in so many ways. It heightens our anxiety. I don't know about you, but anymore, if I open Facebook or Threads, my nervous system automatically just goes right into right into anxiety, right? Um, and so being aware of that and finding ways to connect with each other and actually create the connection points. Since you're here, that means you are willing to invest in this sort of thing in yourself and in other people. I would invite you, begin what Julia Cameron calls creative clusters. Begin inviting people to simply go out and meet you somewhere and share, right? And it doesn't have to be large numbers. All right, there's a couple of questions here coming in through chat, and I wanted to make sure and acknowledge
Yeah.
Stuart, Filippo. Yes, Rula, I didn't want to step on you though. Or
Oh no,
Sarah.
there are 3 questions from Stuart, and there's a little bit of a connective theme, it seems. So I'll just read all 3 of them. And
Okay, thank you.
so the first is, what would you say true wealth is when connecting to our inner outer creativity? How does inner positivity reflect on, and then how is it consumed by the outside world? And I thought there was one more.
Can creativity deepen the fabric of reality?
Reality. Yeah. Can creativity deepen the fabric of reality, even if the world seems apathetic?
I wonder if you'd be willing to help me with that. Just tell me the thread you're feeling in those 3 questions.
I was sensing this idea of how I think a lot of the concept of creativity is as such an inner process, but that it can really be such an influence on the outside world too. And that it can really bring us even closer to the people around us and in the world. That sort of, it's really an expansive process as well as a deepening process.
Agreed. I appreciate you helping me with that too. Yeah, I really feel like this goes back to, well, as I was talking about doing that study and finding out that what we believe about our creativity is what we believe about ourselves. A lot of us carry this deep feeling that I don't matter, that who I am, what I can create. Really, what matters is how well I go and hang out in the cubicle or wherever I work and do rote things over and over again, so I have enough money to pay my bills, so I can keep going, you know. And that's important. I'm not saying it's not, but I feel often we connect creativity to what would be its product, what would be the, and what would the, how would the product be accepted? If I take the time to write this book, this memoir, and pour out the story of my life and the lessons I've learned and everything, and no one reads it, maybe it doesn't matter. I want to tell you that the process of expressing yourself means that you've sent a signal to your psyche, to your deep psyche. You've told yourself, I matter. I matter enough to create this thing, not just to consume someone else's things, right? So I would say that's one thing. And it goes back then to Philip Stewart to the thing of the healthy cell in the collective body. The more that we become healthy, the more that we spread that health. And it doesn't really matter whether it's purchased by or acclaimed by or anything else, other people. The fact of coming into our deep joy, into our deep joy. And joy for me is a very different thing than happiness. To me, happiness is like the geyser. It happens occasionally. We have a new relationship or a new job or something good happens, and that's wonderful, and we feel happy. Many of us chase happiness and forget that what underlies it, what makes it possible, is this deep aquifer we call joy. And it's there, even when we're walking through a desert and we don't think there's any water. It's there, it's underneath us. We might have to dig for it. Those of you who are Jungians will love that depth idea, like going below the surface to find what we really need. I'm not sure that I answered the question. I appreciate your help in answering it, though, Sarah. That was useful.
Yeah, and if anybody else wants to type anything, and I think we still have 15 minutes about.
Oh, good.
So
I was
we're
talking quickly. I thought
very
we had
good
less
on
time.
Yeah, we still have 15 more minutes. So, yeah, that's plenty of time for a few more questions.
Would anyone like to raise your hand? And I love hearing your questions in your voice if you're willing to connect that way. maybe while I'm waiting for some other questions or thoughts to come in, I'll read you a couple of things from the introduction. We believe there's the sucker's choice, either or, but there is an and option, a third way. In our binary dominated world, it is all too easy to notice just on off, black, white, yes, no. We need more options. We are being asked by the times in which we live to find a middle road, some way to navigate out of the tired old ruts. This middle road is often crooked and narrow. Carlos Castaneda called it the path with heart. Joseph Campbell taught us to find it when he said, follow your bliss. One of Carl Jung's clients, troubled by the looming state of things, asked him, Dr. Jung, can the world escape an apocalypse? He was describing the great journey of individual soul excavation. And of course, Dr. Jung replied to that question, yes, if enough people do their inner work.
No.
Looking at chat
Beautiful.
here.
Yeah, there was one that came in on chat, and now we have some hand raised
Oh,
too.
good.
The question in the chat came in first. It's how would you advise to choose which subject to write about when they have all formed a bottleneck and are overwhelming? Please and thank you.
That sounds like a great problem to have, Sarah. Also, it's a genuine problem. I often love to create a dialogue, active imagination. I love to create a dialogue with the various pieces. Sometimes I name them and I ask them to speak up and have them tell me which one needs to be expressed or written about first. That often will help me settle down. Okay, we have a couple hands up, yeah?
Yeah, Marion, I saw your hand first. And you need to unmute.
Thank you. I've really enjoyed the conversation this evening. I wonder, I think one of the things you have mentioned is around curiosity and staying open to possibilities. And I think that that's been really interesting for me because I'm just doing a piece of work with a friend of mine who's incredibly creative as well. And we've been doing some interviews with women who are artists. And then the whole process of doing that and then has brought up other ideas, which I think we're all now extremely excited about the possibility of doing something more together as a result of having some conversations.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. I love that. And did you have, I might have missed a question in there. Not that you have to have a question. Were you asking me something in that?
I was just saying, is that kind of one of the kinds of experience that you have? Is that you can have these serendipitous moments through conversations that opens up something else?
Oh my God. Thank you for clarifying. Yes. Yeah, I think Jung would call that synchronicity. Dr. Marion, I love that experience. And I can't tell you how often it's happened for me. Sometimes I've felt so stuck with an idea, taking a walk with a friend, and just in conversation, no particular agenda, something happens and the solution shows up. So yes, I love that. I love that you've had that experience. And I think this is too, Dr. Marion, I think this is where we become greater than the sum of our parts. And this is why we need to connect with others and invite the connection because there's this exchange. It's alchemy. We actually change the state of something by working with others, right? Oh, I think my friend Susan Wolf has her hand up.
Yes.
Thank you for sharing that, Dr. Marion.
Hi, Jacob. Hello, everyone.
Susan.
I wanted to talk or to encourage you to talk a little bit more about the idea of creativity as a human birthright, because I think so many of us are so distressed and we understand that we're in a time of change. Some of us are writing and painting and making art to share in a more professional sense, but I think there's also a real value of creativity as a healing path and creativity as a community healing. And I wondered if you would like to talk a little bit more about that.
Ooh, I would love to talk more about that. But before I talk more about it, I would love to hear what are some things that come up for you, some actual activities that might not be for commercial purpose, but that you use.
Well, in my personal life, I do both collage, mixed media, and fiber arts. I do some embroidery and applique and sort of creative mending. That's never really meant to be shared with anyone other than the people in my life, but that gives me an enormous amount of joy. And the fiber arts in particular, like, I find very grounding. And for me, it's part of my ancestral work because the needlework brings me in touch with the women throughout, history, really. Um, and I find that to be something that I can uh, tap into when I'm distressed or when I need to self-soothe.
Yeah, I love that. It reminds me of my adult child, Meg, who moved back in with me a few months ago and has been crocheting so much. I'm astonished by Meg's productivity with crocheting, but they're not trying to sell it. It's something that I feel like, how many, I'm just curious in chat, how many would self-identify as being neurospicy, neurodivergent in some way? I have both hands up. Um, many of us, many of us don't realize how much we've been affected by trying to cram our way of being, our way of perceiving and experiencing into the more left brain logical fashion. And so we find ourselves often out of balance, and that can make us feel crazy. Um, and so often some things that are repetitive, such as crocheting or knitting or walking, swinging our arms. That's how EMDR was discovered, was through walking and seeing light. That's probably an apocryphal tale, but I suspect there's some truth to it. So these bilateral activities, now we're just talking about neuroscience and things, but actually very simple things bring us back into a connection with, listen, if you end a day and you've made something, whether it was a meal, or a piece of art or knitting or a beautiful conversation with a friend where there's a connection, if you made something, you go to bed feeling like that day mattered. Yeah. Like whether or not you pay attention, but I want to invite you to begin paying attention to it more. That moment mattered. That day mattered. I mattered in that day, right? Um, because I feel like that does begin to help us, Susan, and all of us. It begins to help us place the importance, the emphasis on these things. It's so easy. How many of us come home from our offices or jobs and sit down and turn on Netflix or something? And by the way, I am not condemning that. Sometimes we need that as part of our self-soothing, right? So that is not a condemnation of it. But how many of us are using those things as mere numbing, right? We're just trying to disassociate, to numb out. And by the way, I understand the need for that as well. So it's not criticizing that. But the fact is, there are ways that we can connect with ourselves and each other that actually fill us up. So if I spend a whole day watching Netflix, I likely don't feel very good. It might be kind of like I ate too many candy bars and had too many sodas, right? It's like, no, that was tasty, enjoyed it in the moment, but I don't really feel good. So I want to invite us all to just make sure we spend a little time each day in some way consciously creating these rituals of creating, whether it's a moment with someone else, a moment with ourselves, or creating some actual tangible thing. Yeah.
Yeah,
Susan, thanks for asking that.
beautiful. And I love that. Even I feel like that when I cook, that you just get your hands into something, and
Yeah.
it can be so mundane, but it's so creative at the same time.
Yes,
So
Sarah. And I love that you just said that because I feel like we are so um I mean many governments refer to us as consumers, right? So I think we are so in the mode of just consuming, sometimes we forget the joy of creating, like what you just said, creating that beautiful meal.
there are two more questions in the chat that I see.
Oh,
The
good.
first is from Deborah. There are so many things to create, yet many of us jump from one thing to the other. Please discuss suggestions on following through to completion.
Hmm. I love that question. There's a little exercise I sometimes do when people are trying to figure that out. Kind of like what Sarah Baxter earlier asked about this bottleneck of too many ideas. What an embarrassment of riches, huh? Um, but I would ask you to pretend that you're sitting on maybe a park bench in the sun and it feels very comfortable, and you're sitting there thinking about all these things you have to create and want to create, and it feels like you'll never have enough time, you'll never have enough life to catch up with it. And this otherworldly being comes and sits down next to you, maybe it's a Gandalf character or something, and they say, I have good news. I have the power to grant your wish to create one of these things, and you will have everything you need. The ideas, the people, the resources, all of it will come together. It'd be deeply satisfying. And you're like, oh my God, amazing. Um, and then they follow up and say, there's one catch. Tell me. You only get to pick one. So I would just say, any of you here that are who are struggling with, I have too many ideas. Inside of you there is a sense of priority. There is something. It's almost like, and I don't like to use something that has so much panic in it, but it's almost like, what would you grab if you only had 30 seconds to leave your burning home? It's really a question of values in some ways. So I want to invite you to use that little thought exercise, if you want, to go, oh, this is one of the things that matters so much to me that I will invest time and energy into it, into its full completion. This is one of those things. And by the way, the good news is the fairy godmother or Gandalf or whomever won't limit you to just one. But if you focus on just one for now, the one that stands out, that says, pick me, you'll find that you actually enlarge your abilities, you enlarge your resources, you enlarge your capacity for more of it. What a great question.
That's a great technique. When I write, I always keep an extra file that's the orphan file that I can
Yes.
come back to.
By the way, Sarah, what do you write, if I may ask?
Oh, I write in the field of depth psychology with a focus on climate change and
Amazing.
how we address those issues through image mostly.
Thank you. Amazing. I'm not
And
just saying that. That sounds like an amazing way to put those things together.
that dovetails a little into the next question from Stuart, because that's my field is Carl Jung, and you've mentioned Jung, and he says, can you say how you were inspired by and how you came by Carl Jung?
Oh, that's a great question, Stuart. You know, as my life got turned upside down and I was really seeking, I was going through a process of tremendous self-discovery. And of course, when you go into that area, I was raised in a fundamentalist cult. And so I had broken away from that years before, and I began exploring various forms of spirituality. And along the way, and during this time of tremendous upheaval, I just kept seeing Carl Jung's quotations coming up. And so that led me to eventually go, okay, all right. This almost seems like the Bible. I definitely need to read after this person. And then of course that opened up this entire world of I felt so seen by Carl Jung's work, even some of it's very challenging work, but those of us who have this sort of offbeat way of seeing, I think we are fed by Carl Jung in a lot of ways.
Yeah, beautiful. The first time I read Jung, I felt like it was a language I'd always known.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's why that book I read from earlier, Belonging by Tokopah Turner, Remembering Ourselves Home, she's a Jungian, does a lot of Jungian dream work and things. And so I think that book also has that sense, Sarah, of exactly what you said. It's like, oh my God, somebody wrote this just for me.
Oh, this is beautiful. I know we only have 3 minutes left, which is, I can't believe it's gone by so fast, and it's been just beautiful. So any last questions? One more. I'm not sure I understand the question entirely, but Stuart says you have innate qualities. I think
That's an interesting question. Yeah, and I don't want to go too far afield since we only have 30 seconds or so, but I will say I love the idea of archetypes, Stuart. So sometimes some people have a little difficulty with like the idea of energies but the idea of archetypes has often helped me understand the different aspects of myself and in others as well. Well, I just want to say thank you all for being such an incredible group of folks to spend time with. And if it's your evening, I hope you go to bed and sleep well. And if you're like me, you're going on to the rest of your day, I hope you have an inspired day. Thank you for supporting so well with your conversation, your hearts in this space.
Thank
We
you
need
so
more.
much, Jacob. This was amazing. And of course, we'd love to have you with us again. This was there was an incredible energy in the Zoom room. And we loved your talk, your vibes, and all what you shared with us and what everybody else was sharing with us too. So thank you, Sarah, for taking care of everybody and the questions as usual. Yeah, and we hope to see you all again very soon. So have a lovely evening or a lovely day,
Mhm.
and we'll see you in a bit. Bye.
Bye.